What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Toes on the Line podcast. This is your host, Gio Grassi, and yes, it has been a long while since I put out an episode, and I have one excuse, and it's a good enough excuse, and it's actually not an excuse. It's a reason being why I have not put out an episode in a while. My laptop had crashed back in March, and then when I got my new one, I said, you know what, let me wait until our semester is over before I even start recording again, because I'm just working these long 14-hour days. Some days were 10 hours, some days were 14, and it was just hectic, and I wanted to get through the semester because these COVID hours were really drenching me, man. It was pissing me off, but that's through, and now we're rolling, man. So I usually pre-record my episodes in advance, so when times like this do come around and I'm real busy in the semester, I could just edit them on a weekend, publish them on the weekday, and really not waste time recording when I just want to relax. So with my computer crashing, I lost all my data, was unable to back up the hard drive. Apple couldn't even help me out with that, and that kind of ticked me off. So I lost about 8 episodes with that. That sucks, but whatever, life goes on. And on this episode, Coach John Patrick has been nice and patient enough, thank you, sir, to hop back on and record another episode with me. And on this episode, we're talking about fatigue. We're talking about how to program for different responses from your athlete, whether it be in season, off season, depending on the stress level of the athlete. Can they continue to build? Do they need to restore? And things like that. I don't want to spoil too much of it because Coach does a great job of just going in and explaining in depth why he does certain things with his athletes. So get ready, line them up, lock and load, get ready to go. Welcome to the Toes on the Line podcast. I'm your host, Gio Grassi. Today I have Coach John Patrick, and just so everybody knows, I pre-recorded an episode back in February with Coach Patrick. My damn laptop crashed. I just told him about it. I think I told him about it like 2 or 3 times, right? And now we're finally getting it going, so we're doing it today, May 26th. This episode's going to come out June 1st. That's a Tuesday, day after Memorial Day.
Yep.
I believe so. So, Coach, listen. First of all, I didn't even say this yet. Thank you for having the damn patience of like 2 months of waiting for me to get a damn laptop and having the free time when our semester concluded to get this thing going, man. How you been?
No, everything's been fantastic, man. No, I totally understand. Things happen. I'm a pretty patient person. So anything for you. It's a pleasure to talk to you, like I said. And as we talked a little bit earlier on the intro, like I don't wish anybody's computer crashing or hard drive. I don't wish that upon anybody. So it's definitely a nerve-wracking experience.
Yeah, no, it's almost like, wishing harm on somebody, man. You don't want that, man. Not even for your enemies, man. Just pray for them. But so kind of wanted to get back into the topic we talked about last time, athlete fatigue. I still remember to this day, though, how you caught my eye with the finger tap test, the CNS finger tap. And I still do that myself. And there's many different ways to assess athlete fatigue. But I love the post that you put out that day. I think it was back in like January or something like that. On LinkedIn. It was a great post, very detailed, and I love what you spoke about there. And if you want to briefly talk about that and other metrics of fatigue monitoring or athlete readiness, however people want to term it these days, certain things that you implement with your athletes.
Right. Yeah. I mean, a real simple thing. I mean, it really wasn't something that I was really primarily just doing it for myself. It was just me training or whatnot, and especially in it was really during the whole pandemic and COVID started acting up or whatnot, and I was just like, hey, I was just tinkering around with stuff, and I came across the CNS tap test just through one of the apps, and I just started playing with it with my own training, and it kind of caught on, right? So I still do it to this day. I mean, and I just base everything off how I feel for that day primarily, but it really gives me a good indicator as far as my recovery or whatnot. Now it's going to be different for everybody, but right. Especially, older individuals like myself or younger individuals like athletes, you really have to take a fine line as far as what you're really training for and how it's dictated. But, with programs that don't have a lot of funding, that could, there are other aspects out there you can use, right? Like, like Whoop, the Oura Ring, like there's a whole bunch of different things that you can use out there to measure, some type of management system or fatigue monitoring aspects. Even the original Omega Wave and stuff like that, people have used in the past. But obviously those things cost money. And if it's something that you don't have the funds to do that, especially with the smaller end programs, I use this initially with our volleyball program when I worked at UNC Charlotte. So it was just something that, coming off of COVID, I wasn't sure if they did anything during as far as training goes. So I'm like, well, how can I, of course I'm going to cut back on volume and cut back on what we're training as far as the expectation as far as training when they come back. But I really want to measure what's going on as far as fatigue goes and how we can load that a little bit differently. So it was something when they first initially came back during the fall, during fall camp or whatnot, even though, it was considered like an off season because we weren't having a season until the spring. It was still something I kind of had ease. So, the school had protocols, right? It was like, I forget the exact protocols as far as what we need to do, but it was like, cut our volume in half and then 3/4. And then the third workout or something, they were back up to the full go or whatnot, as far as volume goes. And then obviously, a lot of our governing associations also gave out protocols and stuff like that we try to follow as much as possible. But, I initiated the CNS tap test with all our female volleyball players. We roughly had, anywhere from 14 to 15 on the team. And it was something that, you can actually email it to individuals and stuff, but we actually, it was something they did on their own, and then they would report a score. So it worked out good just because I would check that. I wouldn't check it really on a daily basis, but more of a weekly basis, just because daily is really time consuming, especially that you have to go, we would lift before practice. So, they'd come in, so that we'd get that information, go from there. But we also gave questionnaires. Questionnaires helped out quite a bit. Do them every morning when they came up. And there are other programs that do questionnaires. We just did one through Google Sheets, which I'd be more than happy to share with anybody if they need it. But I would get that information. They had a certain time period that they needed to fill it out. And we used Teamworks. So Teamworks, we could send it. If you haven't used Teamworks before, it's a basic, like a planning aspect. You can put in training sessions within a calendar. Yeah. And you can contact athletes and stuff. So I actually put the link to the Google Sheet in the Teamworks email or whatnot. And then every morning it would just get sent out. So they would just have to click on it. And then I would get that all that data. So I'd come in, while they're eating breakfast during pre-camp or whatnot, I'd come in about 30 minutes early, have all that information, put it in a spreadsheet. That was kind of a conversation starter, right? Then when we're warming up, or if I see some girls, they come in early to set up the room before they're supposed to train, I'd go up to them and be like, hey, how'd you sleep tonight? I already know what they labeled it, right? But all of a sudden I could start, it was more individualized for each individual, just for the fact that I could see where they're deficient in, and pretty soon I could speak a little bit more. And then I would always have a message throughout the day about certain things. But if somebody wasn't eating, enough meals, wasn't hydrated enough, wasn't getting enough rest, if they felt sore, if a body part felt injured, if they were really fatigued, what else? Irritability. We asked questions on irritability, asked questions on their mood for the day, and then we asked how easy it was for them to fall asleep at night or whatnot. So I had all this information. I mean, it was a pretty extensive survey questionnaire. A lot of people, will do a lot less, but I just wanted a lot of conversation start so I could see what they're going. So that pretty much got me. And it was, I've been with the volleyball team for 3 years, so I already knew a lot of the individuals and how they interacted, some of their the social activities they like to partake in or whatnot, just from, speaking to them. So I already, especially as they got older, whatnot, and living off campus and stuff, that's other things you have to worry about. Right. So you could go and kind of, make each talk a little bit individualized as they're setting stuff up. And then, another thing we did is after practice, so they would lift first, and then they would go to practice directly afterwards. So I sent out a questionnaire after every practice, same thing using Teamworks. And it pretty much asked how they felt for the day. Is their lower body fatigued, upper body fatigued? How hard was practice sessions? How hard was weight sessions? It was all numerical value. And at first, the scores were a little off, but then as they got acclimated to the scoring system, it's going to become a little bit more accurate. Yeah. Especially for, compared to the seniors and juniors compared to some of the freshmen. The freshmen, may have a really low training age, and everything just feels difficult. But, most of our seniors were the ones really, juniors were playing more matches or getting the most out of competition. So we could really gauge that a little bit better, and it kind of fell down the scale of side. So as far as, based off that, we could recommend, the coach was really, you have to get coaches that really buy into this too. And obviously you could do this with GPS and other means. We just didn't have the funding to do so. But I could go in and go, hey, coach, yesterday, this person's really sore. That person's really sore. We just need to watch them at practice today. Or maybe, what are you doing at practice? And the coaches would actually change up some of their practice plan to kind of alleviate some of the soreness, especially initially coming off COVID where they're very inactive. They're going to be sore pretty extensively if they haven't done anything. You could tell who did stuff and who didn't do anything. Yeah. And then we could manipulate practice a little bit because we weren't really playing until the spring. So it wasn't as if it was something we had to get ready for competition, right? So yeah. I think that was huge. It really helped us a lot. It helped us acclimate the girls a lot quicker. It got buy-in. It made them more receptive as far as those talking points that I questioned them on or asked questions about, then pretty soon it was, hey, coach, I didn't have to bring up to them and go, hey, did you eat breakfast this morning? Or, hey, what'd you have for lunch last night? Or they were coming and telling me up front, hey, I had this, hey, I drank, hey, I would give them some, guidelines. Hey, you need to drink this many ounces of water or something like that. So they, a lot of them took it serious. But even if you just, you might be talking to a group of 15, but if you can affect one or two people in a lifestyle change in that manner through using those questionnaires or even the CNS tap test aspect, then it's a job well done, right? Like you're just trying to affect some individuals. And I think it kind of went downhill once the seniors, trickled downhill, sort of say is once the seniors bought in, your upperclassmen bought in, well, then all of a sudden now the lower classmen are like, well, what, they kind of want to be, accepted into the group, right? So all of a sudden they wanted to do similar things that the upperclassmen were doing. And then as the upperclassmen moved on, then that new batch of freshmen coming in would do similar things, right? So it almost started a trend, sort of say. Yeah. But it really, for all the work you put in, you really have to be consistent with it. I mean, I think a lot of coaches get frustrated and they're like, well, I'm putting all this work in and it's just not benefiting my student athletes. Mm-hmm. Well, the thing is, you really have to be consistent with it. You just can't try for a semester and then just give up on it. I mean, there is data that, after a period of time, I know a lot of coaches that, they'll get certain periods of data and they're like, well, it's just not working with our program. It's just not fitting in. And they just exit. It's the first thing to go. Right. But it's definitely something where sending out messages, sending out, a daily, nutrition tip, sending out things like that deal with nothing with the game or the sport that they're dealing with, but it deals with their wellness. I think it's really beneficial because it not only takes us, just specifically with that sport, but then all of a sudden now we care about their overall wellness and how they're doing as their well-being as an individual, right? And then and that kind of gives them a little bit more consciousness. So the CNS tap test, we could dictate things based off of programming if we need to. I really used it as kind of a measurable to take the questionnaires and the data from the CNS tap test and pretty much graph to see how it's flowing. So if if the CNS tap test, if their scores are down but then all their information in the questionnaires was like a higher number, then it may be something that maybe they just don't know numerically how they actually feel, or it's something that they're just trying to push through something, right? So those are like red flags you kind of have to watch a little bit, but you can see a common trend through the questionnaires. I would graph things. So like everything was on a numerical scale, whether it was a 1 through 5 scale or 1 through 10 scale. And then depending on the certain numericals, I would pretty much graph it a certain color. Mm-hmm. So if it was something like on a higher end, 10 being good or 5 being good, it would be marked green. So like a 4 and 5 would be green, a 8, 9, 10 would be green, then middle of the road would be yellow, and then lower end, if it's on a 5 scale, like a 1 and 2 would be like a red, and then if it's on a 10 scale, 1, 2, and a 3 would be red. And then I could see from a color standpoint, you can see from their graph, like, there'd be greens, reds, green, 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 red. And then I could chart that over weeks and I could see where they made conscious decisions as far as change goes, or how they could, how they did that on their own. But then I could also see indicators as far as, okay, hey, well, Megan, for the last 5 weeks, her sleep has been in the red for this amount of time. And obviously I've been telling her about it, but that could be something where visually we try to have a more in-depth conversation with her about sleep or something. Like it could be something that shows some type of data point that, hey, there's a troubled area. You know what I'm saying? So,
right.
Now, obviously with some technology, it's going to be more immediate. If you have a GPS, if you have Catapult or StatSport or any of the GPS systems, you can see some of those things a little bit more immediate. Whoop, we've had some success with Whoop. Some people haven't had success with Whoop. Same thing with the Oura rings or whatnot. A lot of our baseball players, they purchase the Whoop on their own. And then we would actually get, we had so many of them actually purchasing on their own that we were able to actually get their approval. And Whoop actually uses the dashboard system. So I could actually bring up their dashboard if they, signed off that I could get their information. And I had that information around the dashboard. So I could see, where their HRV was, how much recovery for the day they're at, stuff like that, which was really helpful. But that gets buy-in from from the athletes and the coaches, right? Like our coach was really big on, he's a really big weight room proponent, really big on student athlete development and player development. So like he was all about, like, every day he would be preaching during the offseason, hey, you guys need to look into purchasing X, Y, and Z. Yeah. We didn't have the funds to get it, right? But there's a lot of coaches that aren't going to be like that, right? So you really have to, as we talked about earlier, the situation I may be in may not be the same situation you may be in, right? So you have to kind of find little ways to get around things and really try to push things onto your student athletes that's going to benefit them in the long run. So we found success with it, but like I said, you have to stay consistent with it. Like, it's not something you can just week to week and just start changing what the workout is or something like that. Like you have to get some reliable data points at first and see how everybody reacts. And then from there, you can you can change stuff up if you need to after a period of time collecting data. The biggest thing is obviously, when they get back from school, and then, I think everybody knows this, like right around testing and finals time, those are the highest end stress levels. So obviously, it's something like during I would never, like, some people would test like near finals when finals are coming up or end of the semester. And, I'm not a really big testing individual. And if we are going to test, we're going to test way before that as far as getting numbers or like doing anything that's really maximal, just because, if we're coming to an end as far as like fall ball goes, or if we're, finals are coming up and then we're testing weights all at the same time, like that's a pretty high stress environment. So you really have to pick and choose what the most important thing is at that time, and then figure out, how you're going to program that from that. So that takes communication with your coaching staff, and it takes some education with the coaching staff too, because coaches always want to know, depending on what sport, how high did they jump? How much weight did they, is this girl getting stronger? Yeah. Everything's going to, if they're training properly in a good system, they're going to get stronger. They're going to jump, higher. They're going to be faster if you're using sound principles as far as, strength training goes. The biggest thing is what are really good KPIs that you're going to measure, and then when is the important time of the year to measure those KPIs so they don't so they don't interfere with performance variables on the practice or on the game field or in the competition. Vice versa, when is your competition the highest? And then are you going to actually, test some tangibles in the weight room during that time? So it really takes some really some planning out. You just can't go and, just measure, design a program every 4 weeks and just throw it against the wall and hope it sticks. Right. So yeah. Which a lot of coaches do. It is what it is, but I think it's a good way to monitor those things. And I just did it as an indicator based off our pandemic and moving into, kids coming back to campus and stuff, just as a real way to measure volume and what athletes can handle. And then from there, I found it as a real valuable tool, and kids actually relied on a lot more than I did. They saw it as like, okay, well, hey, I'm feeling pretty good today. And that kind of changed their mindset. They would do the CNS tap test, and it would be, you would see that incline peak, and they'd be like, hey, I'm feeling good today. And they'd come in with a little extra oomph, they'd want to do a little bit more weight. They'd want to test a little bit more, they want to run a little bit more. Pretty cool to see. So,
the biggest point I think you said was getting the coaches buy-in.
Right.
Because, if you're just doing it just to do it because everyone else is doing it, and it's like, where are you going with it? You just have a bunch of data that's just, you're wasting your time, you're wasting the kids' times.
Right.
Now if you're using it for educational purposes, that's one thing. And that's one thing I did with sleep monitoring with the water polo kids here at Fordham my first 3 years. What I found with them and the volleyball team was that freshmen always sleep the worst, juniors and seniors. And my belief is, one, you find better habits as a collegiate athlete, just a college person in general. Freshman year, you kind of like, oh shit, it's new. You're out and about, friends, social aspect. And junior, senior year, you probably have your own bedroom. You're not in a dorm. It's not hot as hell. Which a lot of kids complain about their first year. And I think they take their athletics a little more serious at that point. Right. Whereas freshmen are trying to do everything at once. School is killing them. they want to hang out with friends and they really can't because they're practicing. So they sacrifice sleep for that stuff. But one thing I did with the volleyball coach this year, because this was kind of my first full year with volleyball, we used the wellness questionnaires and sleep cycling stuff. And I had kind of my own acute to chronic work ratio sheet that I kind of created on my own with some certain metrics that I kind of valued. Like you said, you got to find your KPIs and value what you can value and, go with it. So we would talk about practice 2 hours before practice. We speak around 2 p.m. Practice was at 4. And we'd go over, who slept well, who didn't sleep well, chronic fatigue, acute fatigue, who's sore from yesterday's lift, who's just sore overall in general and just not recovering. And, he would change practice for some kids, not all of them. He'd have his plan. He'd say, okay, well, this person doesn't need to jump today if their lower body's killing them and they didn't get any sleep last night. Or freshmen aren't sleeping good at all, period. All right, well, let's talk to them, see what the hell's going on. This kid's complaining about back issues, but they're not seeing the athletic trainer. Okay, we'll have them do whatever, some type of rehab during practice, just, something like that, But I think it's valuable when the head coach buys in, number one, and the athletes see value in it, number two. Because one thing that's funny that we talked about earlier was when kids leave your site for summer or when they graduate, are they doing the things you taught them? And I would say about 80% of the kids I coached continue to still do their sleep cycles in the summertime when I'm not trying to, chart that stuff. And even when they graduate and we still chat from time to time, they're like, oh man, I finally hit 8 or 9 hours of sleep, coach, man, you proud of me? And they'll send me their sleep cycle and I'm like, shit, man, you graduated 2 years ago, this is awesome that you're still doing it. But yeah, I think finding markers, I think when it comes to like fatigue assessment or just athlete readiness in general, I think too many people go off the wall and they want to do everything and anything. For me, it's just, two things that I like to look at all the time. One of them is sleep, because I think if you're not sleeping well, one, you're not going to recover. Two, if we're in a growth phase and, we can't grow, we're just losing weight, we're in a catabolic state. That's terrible. And the other thing I like to look at a lot is RPEs. And I know a lot of people say, RPEs, the kid might just put the same number down all the time. And I'm okay with that. If a kid puts 6 all the time, right. It's that one time where he puts a 9 or a 10 and I'm like, okay, something's going on today. What is it?
Right.
And then you have that conversation.
It's a conversation starter, right? Yeah. It's a conversation starter. And all of a sudden, like, it's a red flag, like, okay. And then, maybe they marked something wrong, who knows, but maybe it has nothing to do with weight training or practice. Maybe it's something that was more social interaction, or maybe it was something more personable. And then all of a sudden, if it was something, something happened in the home life, well, now that's a conversation point that you can draw that athlete in even more. Just like we talked about before, like getting a little bit more personable with your student athletes. And it could be something, knowing the parents, knowing if they, have, if they're alumni of the institution that you're at, like, knowing those little things like single parent home, like stuff like that is really, really important. Even their major and stuff is really important, right? Like, just like you talked about, like, it could be something that somebody slept, they only got 4 hours sleep and you're like, oh, what's going on? Well, hey, I had X, Y, and Z exam. I'm in this major. I only got so much sleep last night. So all of a sudden now you become aware of those things, where before you had that stuff, it might've been something where, you just ran that person in the ground. Mm-hmm. And then, it just took them longer for recovery, or they never recovered and maybe an injury popped up. Right. But yeah, just like you said, I think sleep cycle is huge. We try to educate, I know there's apps and stuff for sleep cycles, or, you can just verbally, ask people, hey, how'd you sleep? How many times you wake up during night? Stuff like that. There's 1,000 ways to do it, but I think you're right on track with those variables as far as RPE and then obviously sleep. Those are tangibles that you can pretty much fix over time. So it's huge.
Yeah. Just to add on to that, I remember this semester I was conditioning the volleyball team, and one of the girls had like 3 hours of sleep. I'm looking at her wellness questionnaire that morning. Everything is fucking red across the board. Class stress, personal stress. Right. It's funny because I make sure I delineate classroom stress and personal stress. I'm like, hey, girls, listen, if class is killing you and you're fucked with work and you're late, and not late in a bad way, but it's so much work that you're getting your ass kicked. That's classroom stress. Right. It's not personal stress. And I try to tell them his personal stress is, issues at home, issues in your personal life with, friends, society, boyfriends. And this girl, and it's funny because we were conditioning and she just looked pale as shit after like our second rep. Right. And I'm like, oh God, I guarantee you she broke up with her fucking boyfriend. I go over and ask her, I'm like, hey, do you want to sit this out? Because I don't want you to pass out. Like, I just don't want bad things to happen. We could do this later today. Get some rest if you need it. And then she goes on to say she broke up with her boyfriend. She's up all night, on the phone with him. And I'm like, all right. And then she went on to say, hey, look, I don't want to let my team down, and this means a lot to me. And she finished, and I told her at the end, I said, listen, you look terrible just because you're so pale. You didn't get no fucking sleep or nothing. But her commitment level is great. But I think like stuff like that, I think coaches need to be aware of, because you can always be the shitty coach that's like, fuck that. Line up. You didn't sleep last night. It's your fault. Hey, listen, John, there's times when I've told kids 3 hours of sleep, hey, you know what? Go back, go to sleep, come back at 1 p.m. when it's open hours, and let's lift. All right. And we'll talk about it later. Whatever. If coach wants to hold you to a consequence, then coach will hold you to that. But I need you to perform well today. Come back at 1. I've done that minimal, maybe 3 times. I don't do it all the time because I always tell the kids, listen, we're not going to play this game all the time. We'll pull this card once in the blue moon if you're studying for like a big exam. We got some kids that are studying to be like, physician assistants and shit like that, So, but yeah, I think also we talked about it earlier, getting attached to your athletes in a sense that where you can make that connection where it's like, hey, I understand what you're trying to do with your life post-college. If class is killing you, listen, we want to get you better for your sport, but let's focus up for this exam today. Let's lift tomorrow. Right. If that's the case, But I think building off of that, outside of like fatigue assessment and stuff, like what are the markers and like just things that you want to work on programming wise with your athletes that you haven't been able to work on?
In the past, I've done stuff with volume as far as playing time, right? Especially in season wise. If a person plays so many, especially this deals with like football, and I've even done with baseball and softball. But if a person plays a certain amount of innings, or if they play a certain amount of plays in a game, I would dictate volume based off what's going on, and I would have designated areas, right? So I'd have like, okay, someone comes in season, let's say they're a football player and they come in and they, they play offense and they got over 60 snaps or something, right? So they come into the training session and it's really verbal. You could use some of the things that we talked about as far as questionnaire or whatnot, but I would just do verbal. And this was back in, it was a while ago I did this, but it was probably 2011, 2012. But I would come in and an individual would come in and be like, hey, coach, I'm just sore. My lower body's really sore, And so the way the lift would set up in season, we primarily train 3 days a week. So I would have different realms as far as volume goes. So I'd have a maintain, I would have a restore, and I'd have a gain as far as sets and rep schemes. So when an individual came in, maybe they're sore lower body wise, I'd be, okay, hey, you're restore on lower body. When you go to upper body, you're going to be either maintain or gain. And I would dictate that based on a scale. So they couldn't do any of them more than 2 times in a row. So they couldn't do like restore 2 times, like in a weekly, like week 1, week 2, then they'd have to pick something else week 3, that just so it wouldn't be something someone's just coming in and saying restore all the time, So because I didn't really have a way to really dictate if they were actually fatigued or not. Right. Some guys can play, 40 snaps and they come in and they feel good the next day. Yeah. Some guys can play, 40 snaps and they can barely move the next day, right? It just depends on their GPP and how they recover and what kind of trauma they had to their bodies. So I would do that. And we got some really good benefits from it as far as, overall strength during the season. And we charted everything out as far as volume, but then as far as our strength curve goes. And I think by week 11 in the season, I think we had, if I remember the numbers right, I still have some of the information on it, but I think we had like, upper body wise, we had individuals like 93% of individuals were at their starting strength at the beginning of the fall, or they were higher. And I think it was 88% lower body wise. So it was pretty huge. Like a lot of guys increased their strength during the season or whatnot, especially playing a pretty brutal sport as far as football goes. And then our schedule was pretty difficult too, as far as travel and stuff. So, but that's something I try to, install with baseball. And I made it more of a, more intensive, extensive days as far as like a high-low system goes, especially in season. And based off, I would have an intensive workout or an extensive workout. And then based off how our 3-game series was, I know a lot of teams now are playing 4-game series during the season, but based off how that series was and how much playing time a person got, then I would rotate those exercises. So if someone came in and they, let's say they were a relief pitcher and they only did, pitch so many innings or whatnot, then they might do more of intensive workout, whether it was something that, maybe it was a starter, he went 8 or 9 innings, he threw well over 100 pitchers. Then when he came in, he would do more of an extensive workout the next day or whatnot, if that makes sense. So I kind of played with stress a little bit and try to do that. But the big thing, what I'm really trying to get into now is more, and that those are ways I would individualize things based off sets and reps. But I really am trying to do more, especially with baseball and volleyball, is just more, more of a table assessment if there's time. So really, like, I don't want to say a PT assessment, but really going over joint by joint aspects and really measuring angles of the body. And obviously you can't do this with a large team, really. It really, we've done some of this in the past with like our pitchers, just because pitchers are so, I mean, we try to be as hyper individualized as possible. So we would do that. And then based off those assessments, then we would really try to individualize those programs based off, those pitchers' needs. Just because, pitching is so much about angles, so much about shearing force of the joints, depending on, how the pitcher, what their main pitch is. Obviously, arm angle is important, and obviously spin of the ball is important. So we try to make those individuals, as we try to fix imbalances as much as possible in those individuals. And, it's beneficial, but I think we got a lot more buy-in from pitchers, because pitchers are very difficult. There's some different, I wouldn't say difficult, but they're just different dudes, right? Like
100%. I say that all the time.
Right. If they're sore or something, they're not going to want to do, certain things. They have their superstitious ways. So the more that we can get buy-in and more that we can say, hey, this is gonna affect you individually. This isn't some cookie cutter program, and this is based off your needs. Then the more the more they see results as far as, now we know baseball as far as pitching goes, everybody's looking at velo and, they're doing max pull downs and they're doing, their drive line routines and stuff like that. Well, at least the institution I was at. So, the more they see the velo going up, the more they see that they're improving in their assessments, because we would do assessments every 6 weeks as far as like a PT assessment, a table assessment with them. And just to see if there's variations exercise that we need to change. But those are things that I've been trying with pitchers for a while, but I want to try to convert that over to some more, especially overhead athletes, especially your volleyball players, especially upper body wise for volleyball players, just because their motion isn't the same swing wise as like a baseball, player. Right. But it is something overhead that, everybody has a different opinion of how training overhead athletes. Softball players would be something too, not necessarily for the pitchers, because the pitchers really don't put excessive stress on their shoulder just because of the different throwing motion, but definitely from a position standpoint. So really using, those specific things, but, those are big things that I'm trying to do. If I get a chance to, when I do get a chance to work with those athletes again, is make things a lot more individualized, especially for, not necessarily for, the freshmen or those individuals that training ages are really, really low, but really for those individuals that as they get more innings and more throws and become more specialized in their sport. I think that's something when you look at younger athletes, like your junior high and your high school athletes, obviously, I think we all can agree that, the private sector is kind of specializing those individuals a little bit too soon in some cases.
Yeah.
And they really need more strength. They really need more, intangible GPP training aspects as far as building the demands of the body and the demands of the sport. But then as they get a little bit more specific, older in age, a lot, they're not going to need that much strength anymore. If I have a person that comes in and they can trap bar deadlift, if a guy comes in and he can trap bar deadlift, 2.5 times his body weight, maybe 3 times his body weight, is even worth him going over more than that. If he can come in and trap bar 600 pounds, high bar, does it really matter if he comes in and does 610? You know what I'm saying? Like, you're just putting excessive stress on the body. There's other things we could probably work on. They're going to make him a better overall. We can be more specific in his task, right? So those are kind of things that I'm kind of like, I don't want to say playing with, but kind of experimenting with. I have some former athletes that, are physical therapists. I've worked with a couple specific, from a baseball standpoint, specific training facilities in the past that they do very similar things, but I just think they introduce some things a little bit too early, especially in the high school level, right? Unless a person, even if you have a high school individual that is going to get drafted, I still think it's something it's probably a little bit too soon that you're going to be doing like real specialized exercises with them, right? So I think that's something that needs to become a little bit later on. But the big thing that I've found out is obviously it's very time consuming. You need a coach that understands that, because if you are doing table assessments, I usually run, they may take 20 to 30 minutes for a table assessment. So like time is highly, important. But then from those standpoints, you need a staff too. So having interns and stuff like that to help you out is essential also. So, but I think the college realm, already, the professional realm is somewhat that way, because they do things a little bit more individualized. They do a lot of things, based on velocity and based off assessments, and a lot of them do a functional movement screen. Some of them now have, different programming aspects like the Kong IQ that you stand in front of a screen and it pretty much sees your joint angles and measures it through like a camera, and then you go from there. I'm trying to make things a little bit more specific from those needs and develop some type of philosophy that way. And like I said, I have some physical therapists that are former athletes that are kind of like, they understand like the reason they got into being physical, or they're a physical therapist. So the reason they got into being physical therapists because when they're athletes, they probably get injured or maybe injury pretty much caused them to quit playing their sport early, right? So they have a really big interest in seeing what they really, how those individual programs could really benefit those athletes. So they'll, we'll talk about different aspects as far as training goes, different exercises that some athletes may need to avoid, and just give it different options. And just give an example, like if someone has poor internal rotation of the hip or whatnot, it may be something where we don't do a lot of double leg movements, and we may be doing more single leg movements,
right.
Single leg loaded movements, right? If somebody has a really strong anterior pelvic tilt, well, obviously we may put some modalities in there that help alleviate the hip flexor, but it might be something we do more of a high bar trap deadlift rather than like a low bar that'll put the low back in a dangerous position. So, as far as testing athletes of that or having, getting numbers for kids like that, it's really non-existent. We'll do a lot of testing based off of their performance variables. So like, staying long jump, counter movement jump, vertical jump, static vertical jump, triple broad jump, single leg, triple broad jump. So we'll do more movements based off that as far as athleticism goes, rather than going, hey, this individual trap barred, 600 pounds, he front squatted 300 pounds and they did something else. You know what I'm saying? And that's only after they've hurt, their freshman and sophomore years, they've possibly hit certain KPIs in our general program, if that makes sense. Right. Okay. So once they hit these general programs, then we can move them into a more specific program aspect, if that makes,
gotcha.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Yeah, because I think a lot of people try to rush things, like you said, like private. Like I'm not knocking on the private sector guys. They do do what they do and it works. It's funny because I was asking somebody on it was like Coach Pat Basil on Twitter the other day.
Yeah,
he put a post out about bands, and I was like, hey, look, do you have any metrics to where you begin to use bands? Band resisted stuff with athletes and stuff. He had his metrics, and I'm like, okay, that makes sense. And he went back and said something, and I think he said, I don't know if it was beginners or intermediate lifters. He's like, it's not that they don't need it. It's just not necessary for them at that point in time because they need more strength to develop, before we could put them in these high speed eccentric positions, So I think you're right on what you said about that stuff with, people trying to specialize too much too soon. Right. And my big thing, and I always keep this in my back pocket, and it's like my North Star. It's like, hey, master the basics. Right. If the basics aren't mastered and we're starting to, do too advanced things, then, hey, we're just putting bad orthopedic stress on our joints, and then we're only going to lead to injuries or negative things down the line in training.
100%. That's one thing that we have to battle. Is the private sector. I worked in the private sector for a short period of time, and the private sector is you're only going to have an athlete for a certain amount of time. Usually, it's during maybe it's 3 months because maybe they have to play another sport, or maybe they're doing travel ball or something like that. But the average time is anywhere from 2 to 3 months. There usually a lot of athletes don't train year round. But the thing is you're doing some type of training that, I don't want to say it's gimmicky, but you're doing some type of training to elicit some type of immediate result. Because the quicker your immediate result is, the more people are going to buy in, and the more people are going to come to you, right?
And I think it has to look good too, because I used to work in the private sector as well. And the biggest thing that sucks when you're dealing with the youth or high school athlete is the parent,
right?
And them wanting to see, their kid train like the pros do. And it's like, well, my thing was like, hey, we're not there. We're not pros yet. When we become pros, we can do the stuff Aaron Donald does,
Right. No, 100%. And that's the thing is one of my good friends, he works at Cleveland St. Ignatius, Anthony Rubino. And he tells, one thing he told me is, hey, when you're done training a kid, that, the first thing the parent is going to ask them is how that workout session was when they get in the car. And the workout pretty much, he quote unquote, has to win the car ride. Right. So when the kid gets in the car with the parent right on the way home, the parent's going to go, hey, they're going to look at him and see that they perspired or whatnot. They're going to ask, hey, did you have a good time? And then they're going to see, hey, is, from a parent aspect, is this workout helping my kid get better at the sport? So that's winning the car ride. If the kid kid gets in the car and they go, "Hey, how was the workout?" And he's like, "Oh man, it was a great workout. I think it was worth it. X, Y, and Z. I really had fun today." Then the parent's going to be happy about it, because the money's not coming out of the kid's pocket. It's coming out of the parent's pocket, right? So that's the person you have to cater to the most, I would say. But winning the car ride, especially in the private sector, or if you have a sport camp or something like that, like those are essential things. Like you have to meet those tangibles in order to be effective in now today's society. It's just not about getting the individual better at their sport or building a good foundational base. It's about that smoke show as far as trying to get them interested, right? But you were dead on about building general strength and building foundation, and I think a lot of people bring up like when you're building a house, right? Like you have to lay the foundation first, you lay your general strength stuff, and then you can put up the walls and stuff like that. And then, when you're starting to implement, bands, chains, even highly hyper individualized programs, you don't want to put, you're not trying to put the roof on before you put the sides of the house up. You know what I'm saying? Like stuff like that. So I think a lot of people push that stuff way too quick. And then the potential to get some type of benefit later on in your training age is pretty much dissipated, So if I have a high school kid and all of a sudden I bring him in and I'm just, doing overspeed eccentrics and they're not even ready. They can't even do a regular body weight. Can't even do a body weight squat, it's not even essential. It's going to give a bad taste in the kid's mouth. He may peak too soon as far as his training age goes. And then to get more illicit benefits later on down the road, it may take some type of another desired training effect, or it may take rest because, I don't
possibly.
I mean, I don't really believe in overtraining, but I do believe in under recovering. Right. So it could be something that the stimulus is so high that they just need an extended period of time to recover from something. Right. So that's our job is that, and this just as anybody else. I mean, it's our job to put our student athletes in situations that are going to benefit them. And we're very locked in, especially in the collegiate realm, as far as time, right? We never have enough time for our student athletes just because we're locked in. We only have this much time this day. NCAA only says that we only have, this much time. Well, then a coach comes in and goes, well, hey, we only have 8 hours. Well, I need the guys for 3 hours. That means you can only have them for 5 hours. You know what I'm saying? So we're so locked for time that a lot of stuff as far as acquisition of athletic performance is we just can't meet our needs sometimes. So we're really locked. We're kind of like scientists as far as trying to push all that stuff in there in a short period of time. But another thing is, what's the coach want? We're dictated by what the coach believes in. I don't want the guys squatting heavy, or I don't want, our guys to be fatigued for practice, or, like stuff like that. But then you have to, there's a fine line. The worst thing, I've worked with coaches in the past a long time ago that would be like, well, I don't want my guys sore for practice. This is in season. Well, I'm like, all right, well, that's fine. And then as soon, maybe some guy comes up and goes, hey, coach, even though we have a game on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, it's Tuesday. I'm a little fatigued because we had workouts yesterday. And he's like, well, then we're not working out the rest of the week. Well, you just totally did a reversal, because now the next time the kid works out,
he's going to be
another week and they're going to be more sore. You know what I'm saying? And then all of a sudden, as the team goes in season, towards the last 3 weeks, we're not going to work out at all because we need to focus on baseball. Well, you've been playing for 12 weeks already. Like, you should be pretty baseballed out by now.
Fucking locked in. Yeah, you should be able to read every damn pitch that comes to you by now, brother.
Right. Everybody should be going pretty good. So we're always given a lot of different tangibles, and like, I say time and time again, the experiences that I've had and something, as far as a program that I've had that worked, I may bring it into your situation or another coach's situation, and it just totally doesn't work at all. So you really have to, see what other people are doing. And I think a lot of people do that, but then you can only take it for face value and try things out, here and there. So
yeah, definitely, man. Definitely. Well, Coach, man, I appreciate it, man. This was good stuff, good knowledge you brought to the table, man. How, fatigue-wise assessment, readiness, and, how you kind of engineer that stuff with your program and with, restore, your volume and stuff like that. I think that was awesome. Before I let you go, man, I got to ask you this, the golden question to ask everybody, man. If you weren't coaching strength and conditioning, what other career do you see yourself in? But the the underlying clause here is you cannot say teaching.
Okay.
Because everyone says, oh, I'd be a teacher. It's like, dude, come on, man. That's a cop-out answer, man.
No, I mean, seriously, I would probably be a chef. I'd probably work in a restaurant or go to culinary school. I think I gave this. It hasn't changed since the last time I talked to you before, because I think that's the same answer I gave before. But yeah, I mean, that was something I wanted to do out of high school, and I really, grew up where I was. I had no idea how to even obtain that. Because back then we didn't even have computers, but it was just, it was something that, I always liked cooking, when I would go visit my grandma's house, we'd always cook together and stuff. And it just kind of, I still cook today or whatnot. So I'd like to, dabble in that a little bit and go from there. So that'd be pretty exciting. I mean, I love to eat too. That's why I cook, but
yeah, who doesn't love to eat, right?
Right. Of course.
What's the go-to meal, man? What's the $200 meal, man?
I mean, geez. I'm pretty basic. I mean, I like steak and potatoes, but one thing that I've made in the past, I don't know if you had brajol, but it's like it's just thin steak with stuffing. You pan fry it first, and you put some spaghetti sauce on it, and then bake it, and it's like stuffed steak kind of. And you serve it with the side of pasta. It's pretty legit. So
my man, little Italian side,
little Italian.
There you go. I know what you're talking about. Yeah, man.
I mean, Italian's probably the best comfort food. You know what I'm saying? So it's pretty amazing stuff. So
there you go. I got to get you up here to North Jersey, man. We got the best Italian food in the whole land.
I can believe it. I might just take you up on that.
Yeah. Well, you let me know when you're around, man. I got you, Coach. But hey, listen, again, thanks for coming on and thanks for being patient with me with the whole mess I had going on here, man.
No, for sure. It's a pleasure, man. I mean, the podcasts you're putting out are fantastic. You have great guests on there. I'm just really happy I could be a part of it.
And I'll be honest, I was highly disappointed, and I was like pissed off to myself that I kept seeing John Patrick on this podcast, that podcast, this podcast. I'm like, God damn, I had him on mine first. My computer crashed, man. So damn it, man.
It's really weird, man. Like, cause I did one podcast, and all of a sudden people would be reaching out and they're like, hey man, like I saw you in here. You want to be on our show? And I'm like, yeah, I mean, sure. Like, I have no problem with that, but I'm like, in the back of my head, I'm like, Gio was the first one, man. Like
yeah, man.
So, I mean, we had to hit it up again.
I'm glad I got that on record.
We had to hit it up again, and I mean, we didn't miss a beat. But it's a pleasure talking to you, bud. I mean, I think you're doing great things at Fordham, and this podcast is awesome. And I wish you all the best.
Thank you, man. Thanks for coming on again, brother.
No problem.